What if I told you the house you live in, that were originally designed for you to buy and own, has been intentionally re-engineered to be a subscription to you, me, and many others to pay for the rest of our lives? Many of you may not understand, but what I mean is what I found from documents regarding a DOJ lawsuit is the fact that Wall Street firms seem to be striving for ownership of homes in middle-class suburbs across America, so they can use a system or software to charge renters across the country as much rent as possible, just so they can make as much profit as possible. This isn't some made-up theory. This is actually a decades-long documented financial blueprint designed to turn neighborhoods across America into high-yield rental portfolios. When I started digging into all the data behind why single-family homes suddenly became unaffordable for ordinary working-class Americans, I assumed I would find the usual reasons and factors like supply shortages, interest rates, or maybe some bad tax policy. But I came across federal filings, government audit reports, corporate SEC disclosures. A completely different picture started to slowly emerge. This housing problem wasn't a natural market evolution. It's actually quite clear to me that this is an engineered shift. Tracing back to decades ago, the American dream was built on a simple formula.
Because of the accomplishments of the building industry, the entire face of the nation is being changed for the better.
You worked, you saved a down payment, you bought a piece of property, and over some years, you not only pay off the property, but also get to pass it on to your children. This was the most obvious way for middle-class financial security in the country, a way to have an affordable living. But you see today, that ladder to financial security has been pulled up so none of us can easily reach that level of comfortable living. The most well-known signal in society that has been warning us of this ruthless shift is the home price to income ratio. The average home price to income ratio has hit record highs. Starter homes under $200,000 have basically vanished from major areas in the United States. Our entire generation is being shoved into a permanent rental trap. It just seems like they want to block every path and make sure we slave for them and rent forever. We can't even afford to easily own the roof over our heads anymore. So how did we get to this point? Who allowed this to happen? Ronald Reagan. More importantly though, how did private equity firms go from betting on mortgages to directly owning millions of suburban homes? To understand the answer, we have to trace the money back to a single financial invention created by an investment bank in 1977. This is the very thing that quietly set off a domino effect that ended with Wall Street buying up dozens of neighborhoods. As the 1980s arrived, a weird shift started happening in American culture. For decades, banking had been a famously boring and conservative industry in the eyes of the public. Local bankers were seen as those guys who wore those grey suits, worked 9 to 5, sitting quietly on a chair for hours on end, until this weird thing started to happen. Almost overnight, Wall Street traders and investment bankers joined the movie stars and the rock stars as the new pop culture phenomenon. These guys were caught sitting ringside at pay-per-view fights in Vegas, at Formula One Grand Prix races, hosting lavish parties on super yachts in the Hamptons, surrounded by supermodels, and spending bonuses worth millions of dollars like it was merely pocket change. As we all know, this phenomenon was later glorified in movies like Wolf of Wall Street. But in the real world, the sheer volume of wealth being generated across that one street was simply unprecedented. Where was all this money actually coming from? It wasn't coming from traditional corporate loans or old money industrial factories. It was being generated by a brand new financial machine. A machine that took the quiet, predictable world of suburban home mortgages and turned it into a high-stakes trillion-dollar trading desk. And so here comes the man standing at the center of the machine, a trader named Louis Ranieri. Before the 1970s, buying a home was apparently a local transaction. To get a house, you simply went to a local savings and loan bank in your town. The loan officer probably knew your family, so they looked at your steady employment, and then issued a mortgage using a relatively affordable cash deposit. After this is done, the bank held the loan on its own books for 30 years. Because the bank carried the risk of default, they were naturally cautious and the housing market was bound tightly to local wages. Wall Street was virtually non-existent in suburban real estate. Well, until Louise came along and changed everything. Now that you understand the backstory and have a clear picture of how things used to work, let's move on to our man Louise. In the late 1970s, Louise Ranieri, a trader at Salomon Brothers, pioneered a financial mechanism that transformed how housing worked: mortgage-backed securities, or MBS. The more I looked into it, the more I noticed the concept was actually simple but quite radical. Instead of a local bank holding a mortgage for 3 decades, investment banks could bundle thousands of individual home loans into a single pool, slice them into bonds, and sell them on Wall Street to institutional investors all over the world. Ranieri famously called it financial alchemy. At first it seemed like a win-win. It flooded the housing market with liquidity, money poured in from pension funds in Europe and sovereign wealth funds in Asia directly into American residential mortgages. But this mechanism created a very dangerous disconnect. Once local banks realized they could make a loan and immediately sell it off to Wall Street for a quick fee without holding long-term risk on their balance sheet, the incentive structure shifted from steady lending to all-out maximum volume. To keep this financial engine fed with fresh mortgages, the financial industry needed government deregulation. And guess what happened? Like they did with gambling and sports betting, as I showed you on my previous video, our national government delivered the deregulation on a silver platter. You can check out the prediction markets video after finishing this one. Please don't mess up my watch time. But anyway, my point is, always follow the money if the government's actions start confusing you. In 1982, Congress passed the Garn Germain Depository Institutions Act, or whatever it's called.
Consensus within the Congress and by their assistance. What this legislation does is expand the powers of thrift institutions by permitting the industry to make commercial loans and increase their consumer lending.
This act basically deregulated savings and loans, allowing adjustable rate mortgages and ballooning payments. 2 years later, the Secondary Mortgage Market Enhancement Act of 1984 stripped away state-level restrictions on mortgage securities, basically giving Wall Street unrestricted access to home loans everywhere in America. As we go through the 1990s, guardrails came down one by one. The repeal of Glass-Steagall in 1999, which officially erased the barrier between commercial banking and high-risk investment banking. By the time the early 2000s came along, Wall Street didn't just want mortgages for the sake of simply desiring them. They actually craved them. This hunger for high-yield mortgage securities grew so big that Wall Street started lowering their lending standards just to keep manufacturing paper. Some of you probably know how this ended. Subprime loans, predatory lending, rating agencies corruption, and ultimately the financial crash in 2008.
2008 was a tumultuous year for the economy. The housing market collapse created one financial crisis after another, and it often seemed as if the news could only get worse.
Millions of Americans lost their jobs. They lost their savings and lost their homes to foreclosure after the 2008 crisis hit. Most people thought after a disaster like that, Wall Street would be pushed out of the housing market for good. But what I discovered in post-2008 public records is quite shocking.
Google 7%, Intel is weak. I've been looking at the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index for weeks now because it's dictated the trading here. We're down 6.5%.
The 2008 crash wasn't the end of Wall Street's involvement in housing. And surprisingly, it merely set us up for phase 2 of their brutality. Going back to the immediate aftermath of the 2008 financial crash, the US housing market was completely broken. Millions of single-family homes sat in foreclosure, owned by government-sponsored entities like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, or they were held as bank-owned properties. The value of homes was bottoming out, and ordinary working-class families couldn't get a mortgage even if they wanted to, because credit markets had frozen shut. That, right there, is precisely when private equity saw the opportunity of a lifetime. firms like Blackstone, led by Stephen Schwarzman, realized something game-changing. For decades, institutional investors avoided buying single-family homes because managing thousands of individual houses across different cities was considered an operational nightmare. Multifamily apartments were easy, one roof, one property manager, and of course, one tax bill. When seeing these things through this lens, you realize that single-family homes were quite messy to own for these Wall Street giants. But that 2008 crash changed everything. It miraculously created a price drop so extreme that the numbers suddenly made sense. As we move forward a few years, we reach the year 2012. In 2012, the entity called Federal Housing Finance Agency launched a formal initiative, the REO to Rental Pilot Program. Under this program, the government took thousands of foreclosed single-family properties owned by Fannie Mae and offered them for sale in many auctions. Here's the catch though. These housing portfolios weren't auctioned off one by one to local families or some community land trust. They were packaged into multi-million-dollar blocks designed specifically so that only private equity with ungodly amounts of capital could bid for them. Blackstone then created a subsidiary called Invitation Homes. And oh boy, when I tell you this left me stunned. Basically, in this manner, Blackstone went on an unprecedented buying spree. Armed with billions in capital from global investors, they were spending tens of millions of dollars a day buying distressed suburban homes in Atlanta, Phoenix, Tampa, and Charlotte at discounts of 30 to 50% below the replacement cost. Private equity firms were just outbidding everyone. Between 2011 and 2016, over 700,000 single-family homes across America were quietly absorbed by institutional capital and converted into rental properties. And then came the move that sealed the deal. In 2017, Fannie Mae, that same government-backed entity taxpayers funded to promote affordable home ownership, did something shocking. They guaranteed a $1 billion loan explicitly to Blackstone's Invitation Homes. Let that actually sink in. Taxpayer-backed government guarantees were used to help a private equity giant finance the accumulation of thousands of single-family homes. This effectively competing directly against the same taxpayers whose credit was used to back their purchases. Wall Street had completed a massive rug pull. They stopped just selling the debt on your house or what could have been your house. Now they owned the house outright. Which brings us to the next question. How do you turn hundreds of thousands of individual suburban homes into a smooth, predictable money machine that Wall Street investors can trade on the stock exchange? To make this single-family rental model profitable over the long term, private equity had to overcome two major obstacles: operational cost and yield maximization. To solve these, they turned to modern technology and new financial engineering. First, they invented the single-family rental securitization. Just like how Louis Ranieri packaged mortgages in 1977, private equity firms began bundling the rental income streams of thousands of homes into corporate bonds. If you paid your rent on the first of the month to an institutional landlord, your rent check was effectively paying out interest yields to global bondholders. Second, to streamline operations, these corporate landlords eliminated local property managers and replaced them with centralized algorithmic software. Instead of a human landlord sitting down to evaluate local market rates or negotiate with a good tenant who wanted to renew their lease, companies began adopting pricing algorithms, most notably systems like Realpage. These software platforms collected real-time data from hundreds of thousands of rental units across metropolitan areas. The algorithm calculates the absolute maximum rent that they can extract from a specific market without spiking vacancy rates beyond a precise mathematical threshold, basically without scaring the crap out of the locals. If multiple corporate landlords in the same suburb use the same algorithmic pricing software, it creates a phenomenon known as algorithmic cartel behavior. The software encourages landlords not to compete on price, deliberately keeping units vacant if necessary to force the baseline market rent upwards across an entire zip code. In recent antitrust lawsuits filed by the Department of Justice against companies using this same system or this same software, Investigators noted that these systems replaced market competition with algorithmic coordination. At the same time, private equity realized that buying existing homes wasn't the only way to dominate the market. They started building their own supply through the build-to-rent model. Entire subdivisions are now constructed from the ground up. The goal isn't to sell to you, my fellow prospective homeowners. Their business plan is selling the community directly to an institutional fund. Every street, every home, every garage, built strictly to be rented forever and line up the pockets of the suits down on Wall Street. By the time the post-2020 housing boom hit, ordinary retail buyers weren't just competing with other families at an open house. They were competing against institutional algorithms backed by non-banker lending, corporate credit lines, and cash offers that could waive inspections and close in merely hours. When a family offers $400,000 with a conventional mortgage contingency and a corporate fund offers $420,000 in clean cash, the family is bound to lose every single time. The ending result of this Wall Street carnage is a structural squeeze. High interest rates make buying unfathomable for individuals, while corporate buyers absorb inventory, push up home prices, and drive up rental prices simultaneously. Which leaves us with the last question: where does this actually end? When you step back and look at the whole timeline, from the invention of mortgage-backed securities in 1977 to the deregulation of the 80s and the 90s, the government-assisted bulk sell-off after 2008, and the algorithmic rent fixing of today, you see a clear pattern. This was never a random fluctuation in supply and demand. It was a systematic financialization of basic human shelter. Housing in America was intentionally shifted from a social cornerstone into an asset class designed to yield 7 to 10% annually for institutional balance sheets. The consequences for this shift are profound. For nearly a century, home equity accounted for over 60% of the average American household's net worth at retirement. By transforming a nation of homeowners into a nation of permanent renters, that equity engine is destroyed. Instead of paying down a 30-year asset that you eventually own, your monthly housing expenditure becomes a permanent subscription fee, a recurring revenue item on an institutional investor's balance sheet that increases every single year at the command of an algorithm. Analysts at major financial institutions have projected that institutional ownership of single-family rental homes could grow dramatically over the next decade, particularly in high-growth suburban areas across the country. Wall Street didn't just buy the American dream. They redesigned it, rebranded it as a monthly service, and sent you the bill. The goal is simple. You will own nothing, you will pay monthly, and Wall Street will collect the yield. To see my video on what private equity or Wall Street did to American healthcare, just click the video on your screen and I'll see you there.